Hi, in this video I'm going to give an introduction to domestic abuse and sexual violence and explain how this affects the Jewish community. It's really important that we recognise that both domestic abuse and sexual violence happen in all walks of life. They happen to women of any class, any religion, nationality, socio-economic status or level of education. They happen to women we know and women like us. The Jewish community is no different in that respect. But from our research, we know that Jewish women take longer to report than the national average, around 11 and a half years instead of 9 years. So, what is domestic abuse? Domestic abuse is not usually just one type of abuse. We define it as an incident or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening, degrading and violent behaviour, including sexual violence. In most cases, it's done by a partner or ex-partner, but it could be by an intimate family member or carer. Whilst domestic abuse can happen to anyone, in most cases, it's experienced by women and perpetrated by men. Throughout their lifetimes, 1 in 4 women will be affected by domestic abuse and 1 in 10 will be experiencing it at any one time. That's a huge number of women. You can find out more about the legal definition of domestic abuse by looking up about the new Domestic Abuse Act of 2021. It's important to emphasise that domestic abuse can be physical, but it might not be. Emotional abuse is very common, especially coercive and controlling behaviour such as tracking a woman's movements, telling her who she can and can't see and telling her how to dress, for example. Financial abuse is also very common, and it includes not allowing her to have her own money, making her account for every penny she spends, or not allowing her to have a job, amongst other things. And before I move on to discuss sexual violence, I want to say a word about spiritual abuse, which has now been legally recognised as a form of domestic abuse, following input from organisations including Jewish Women's Aid. Spiritual abuse is the use of religion or belief as a weapon against another person to control or to harm them. In the Jewish community, spiritual abuse can take a number of forms, including get refusal. That's when a man refuses to give his wife a Jewish divorce, leaving her chained in the marriage. It includes the rare but illegal forced marriage. It includes men misrepresenting religious rules to coerce their wife into doing something. For example, falsely claiming that it says in the Gemara that a woman has to do X or Y. Spiritual abuse might be coercing a woman to keeping Jewish laws or preventing her from carrying out the Jewish rituals that she wants to. It's really important to recognise this form of abuse in the Jewish community. Well, let's move on now to sexual violence. Sexual violence is any sexual act where there is no consent. Consent means choosing to agree to a sexual act without feeling threatened or coerced and having the freedom or capacity to make that choice. People often imagine that sexual violence against women is something perpetrated by a stranger, but it can happen within a relationship, of course with someone you know. Sexual violence happens to 1 in 5 women in their lifetimes, and it can have severe and long-lasting impacts, including shame, anger, self-blame and anxiety. Sexual violence has long been something which women of all backgrounds have felt too ashamed to talk about, and this is a particular challenge in the Jewish community. That's why it's vital that at Jewish Women's Aid we have our specialist service, our DINA service, to support women who have had this traumatic experience. One of the most common questions that we hear at Jewish Women's Aid is, why don't women speak up when they're being abused. But there are loads of reasons why women don't come forward for help, including the fear they won't be believed, fear of repercussions, fear of being blamed, the shame, the guilt, the stigma, and many other reasons, including simply not knowing where to go for help. Which is why the national average before seeking help is 9 years. But there are additional barriers for Jewish women, like fear of bringing shame on the family and wider community, fear of not being believed because the perpetrator is well known or well respected in the community, fear of losing her children, fear of the perpetrator refusing to give her a get, fear that the rabbi will side with the perpetrator, or of her children being ostracised from Jewish schools. And for Jewish women who've come from other countries, fear of losing their right to stay in the UK. This is why it's so important that Jewish Women's Aid exists. We have specially trained staff and counsellors who understand the Jewish cultural and religious issues. We provide a soft landing for Jewish women, from secular to Orthodox. So how does Jewish Women's Aid help? Each month, we support around 150 women and girls, aged 16 plus or 14 plus in London, offering practical and emotional support, helping them and any children to be safe, helping them access emergency housing or legal support if they need it. We offer counselling for women and therapy for children who've lived with domestic abuse. Beyond our frontline support work, we raise awareness and understanding across our community through talks and trainings and through our education programme in Jewish schools and other youth settings. If you are worried about your own situation or you're worried about a friend or a family member, you can contact us confidentially for advice using our helpline, email or web chat service. You can find full details plus more information about our work on the website at jwa.org.uk. I hope you found this video useful. For more resources, including fact sheets and articles, please have a look at our full toolkit at jwa.org.uk toolkit. Thank you.